Hi, I'm Mina.
And I'm Yules.
Thanks for tuning in to Artificially Informed.
When you're just looking at a photograph of like an ancient footprint perfectly preserved in the mud,
Right.
or maybe like a handprint left on a cave wall, there is this immediate, almost visceral connection to the past.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just this proof that someone was there.
Yeah.
They existed. They left a mark. And today on this deep dive, that's exactly what we're looking at. We are going on a really sweeping journey for you
A
today.
huge journey, yeah. We're connecting a lot of dots.
Exactly. We're starting with ancient mysteries hidden in the earth and the ocean, and then we're moving into these high-stakes, geopolitical chess matches that are completely shaping our global economies right now.
Right, the stuff that hits your wallet.
Yeah. And from there, we are diving into the bleeding edge of artificial intelligence, our ambitions in space, and finally the invisible, literal cosmic forces threatening our modern way of life.
It's a lot, but it's fascinating because it all ties together. You look at these seemingly disconnected events, and they are all just threads in the same global tapestry. It's really about adaptation.
Totally. And the perfect example of that adaptation, or I guess preservation, brings us to something that just happened at the bottom of the North Atlantic.
Ah, right, the Titanic.
Yeah, the RMS Titanic. It's been resting down there for 112 years. We all know the broader story, the tragedy of that night. But a company called RMS Titanic Incorporated recently made this, massive discovery.
A really surprising one, honestly.
Yeah, they found a 2-foot-tall bronze statue called the Diana of Versailles.
Right.
And this piece was originally a centerpiece in the first-class lounge of the ship. It was last photographed in the debris field way back in 1986.
Wow.
And then it was just lost to the dark until literally right now.
The logistics of that are, it's mind-boggling, just relocating a 2-foot object in that specific environment. To give you some context on the physics here, the Titanic rests at a depth of about 12,500 feet.
Which is just deep. So deep.
Right, the pressure down there is roughly 400 atmospheres, so that equates to about 6,000 pounds of force per square inch on any equipment you send down.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and it's pitch black, freezing cold, and the ocean floor isn't static. It's this chaotic, shifting landscape of mud and rust and debris. They had to rely on incredibly advanced synthetic aperture sonar just to find it.
I really want to break that down for a second because the irony of this to me is just fantastic. We are deploying military-grade, bleeding-edge sonar technology.
Millions of dollars of tech.
Exactly. Stuff that costs millions to operate just to find a tiny bronze statue in a literal ocean of garbage and twisted metal. It feels like, I don't know, using a spy satellite to find a lost earring in a shag carpet.
The shag carpet analogy is spot on, but it's even worse than that, especially when you consider that the carpet itself is actively dissolving.
Oh, right, because of the rust.
Yeah. So sonar works by emitting sound waves and measuring the acoustic backscatter, right? The echoes that bounce off objects. But the Titanic is currently being consumed by these iron-eating bacteria.
Wait, bacteria is eating the ship?
Yeah, specifically a species called Halomonas titanicae. As they eat the steel, they form these massive structures called rusticles, which eventually just collapse into dust, so the acoustic signature of the entire wreck is constantly changing.
That's wild.
It is. Distinguishing the backscatter of a solid bronze statue from a collapsing pile of oxidized steel, it requires algorithms capable of mapping the seabed with millimeter precision.
Okay, but that deterioration, that actually brings up a really intense debate within the archaeological community right now. And I have to push back a little on the enthusiasm for this whole recovery mission.
Sure.
At what point do we as a society stop treating the Titanic as an active archaeological site and start just letting it rest in peace? Over 1,500 people died that night. It is a maritime grave.
It is, yeah.
Are we crossing the line into, grave robbing for nostalgia? Or is there actual vital historical value in bringing up a bronze statue of a Roman goddess?
It's a great question. And that tension you're highlighting, it's the defining ethical conflict in modern marine archaeology right now.
I bet.
On one side, you have preservationists and historians, and they present a really compelling argument regarding that physical degradation we just discussed. Because the ship is literally dissolving, they argue that if we do not recover these artifacts now, They are going to be lost to human history forever.
Right, the ocean is just going to take them completely.
Exactly. Artifacts like the Diana of Versailles serve as these physical primary sources. They tell us about the opulence, the cultural priorities, and frankly, the hubris of the early 20th century.
Okay, I get that.
Yeah.
But the other side of that argument is the sanctity of the site itself, right?
Definitively. You have descendants of the victims, along with a lot of ethicists, arguing that the site is first and foremost a cemetery. The prevailing moral standard on land is that you wouldn't take a backhoe to a terrestrial graveyard just because the headstones are weathering.
Right, you'd be arrested for that.
Yeah. So they view the continual mapping and extraction as this massive intrusion. The underlying question is whether our drive to physically preserve history overrides our moral imperative to respect the dead.
It is such a difficult line to navigate, but I think it really speaks to our fundamental human need to uncover our past, to find those footprints we talked about earlier.
Yeah, we can't help ourselves.
And if the Titanic tells us about the industrial ambition of 1912, there's another discovery that tells us about our ambition like 8,000 years ago.
Oh, the megastructure.
Yes. Researchers in the Middle East have unearthed this massive structure dating back to 6200 BCE. And what is really wild to me is that this is only the sixth megastructure of its kind ever documented globally from that specific era.
It's incredibly rare because when we evaluate the broader timeline of human history, 6200 BCE drops us right into the Neolithic period.
Okay, and what does that mean practically for the people living then?
Well, this is the crucial era when humanity was transitioning from nomadic hunter-gatherer societies to settled agricultural communities. Discovering a megastructure from this specific window completely upends the old, simplistic textbook narrative you probably learned in school.
Which was what? That we just figured out farming and then settled down?
Basically, yeah. We used to think early humans figured out how to domesticate wheat, and then slowly, over thousands of years, decided to build permanent towns.
But this structure challenges that, because building a megastructure requires an incredible amount of organization. I mean, you can't just casually suggest to a group of nomads that they should stop foraging for berries and start moving massive stones.
No, you definitely can't. The logistics of ancient construction are staggering when you strip away modern tools. To build something massive out of stone or earth 8,000 years ago, you need hundreds of people. And those people need to be fed while they're working, which implies you already have an existing, stable agricultural surplus.
Oh, so the farming had to be really established first.
And at least highly organized. You need a hierarchical structure to coordinate the labor. You need shared cultural or religious beliefs to motivate the workers to undertake such a grueling tasks. We see this mirrored in places like Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey, which is actually even older.
Wow.
Yeah. These structures strongly suggest that complex social organization and perhaps shared communal identities actually predated what we traditionally classify as civilization.
To put that in perspective for you listening, trying to organize a group of people to build a megastructure 8,000 years ago is like trying to build a modern skyscraper today, without blueprints, without advanced mathematics, and without cranes. You just have people, rocks, and a shared vision.
It's a profound testament to early human cooperation and adaptability. And, while we're exploring how species survive and adapt, we have to look at two massive paleontology finds that are actively rewriting our biological history right now.
Yes, let's get into these, because long before humans were engineering stone monuments, life on this planet was proving its resilience against some insurmountable odds.
Truly apocalyptic stuff.
Right. So these two finds are fascinating. Let's start with the one at Virginia Tech in the United States. A student there managed to reconstruct a completely crushed fossil of a dinosaur skull from the late Triassic period.
A painstaking process, I'm sure.
Yeah, and it turns out this is a newly identified species of carnivorous dinosaur. But the crucial detail here is that this specific lineage survived a mass extinction event.
Yeah, the end Triassic mass extinction, which occurred roughly 201 million years ago. And it was catastrophic. The underlying mechanisms of that extinction were just brutal.
What kind of asteroid?
No, in this case, it was massive volcanic activity leading to severe ocean acidification and runaway global warming.
Oh, wow.
The food web completely collapsed. The fact that this specific carnivorous lineage survived indicates that life can find or create pockets of adaptability even in the most resource-scarce scenarios imaginable.
Okay, and speaking of life finding a way, researchers in China were studying the Shibantan biota, and they uncovered a 550-million-year-old soft-bodied sponge fossil.
Right. They named it Helicolicellus.
Helicolicellus, yeah. And the reporting notes that this fills a massive gap in early animal evolution. But my question is, and I really don't understand this, how do you even find a fossil of something soft? I always thought fossils were just rocks that used to be bones.
That is exactly the crux of why this discovery is so monumental. Paleontologists refer to this as the taphonomic window.
Taphonomic window.
Yeah, it's the specific conditions required for an organism to fossilize. Sponges are widely considered the oldest known animal group on Earth, but early sponges lacked the hard, mineralized skeletal structures like spicules that typically survive the fossilization process. They were entirely soft tissue.
So they would just rot away normally.
Exactly. So we've had this terrible missing years gap in the physical record.
So how did this one, Helicolecellus, survive to be found 500 million years later?
It requires a very rare type of preservation. It usually involves rapid burial in fine-grained sediment in an environment that is entirely devoid of oxygen.
Because oxygen feeds the bacteria that causes decay.
Exactly. No oxygen, no bacterial decay. Finding the physical imprint of a soft-bodied creature from 550 million years ago confirms that the complex evolution of these simple animals laid the necessary groundwork for the eventual explosion of more advanced biological life.
It is incredible. Whether it's a soft sponge leaving an imprint in mud 500 million years ago, a dinosaur adapting to volcanic climate change,
Sure.
or early humans figuring out how to construct megastructures to adapt to a changing social landscape. History is literally built on the remnants of those who survived radical shift.
It's all about who adapts fastest.
Right. But while ancient history shows us how our world was formed through these adaptations, our current global landscape shows us how incredibly fast it can all fracture.
We're seeing that right now, yeah.
We really are. We have to look at what is happening today in the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah. The economic and strategic gravity of the Strait of Hormuz, honestly, cannot be overstated.
For those who might not know, the Strait of Hormuz is the primary maritime choke point for the global energy supply. And right now, U.S. President Donald Trump has initiated a naval blockade of the strait.
A very significant move.
Huge. The stated objective is to curb Iranian oil exports and regional influence. The reporting on this is extensive today, and the global reactions have been immediate.
Analyzing the geopolitical logic behind this requires looking at the competing strategic frameworks. And we have to be really objective here. From the perspective of the United States administration, this blockade is framed as a necessary, proactive, defensive maneuver.
Okay, so how are they justifying the disruption?
The U.S. Treasury Secretary articulated the administration's stance pretty clearly. They acknowledge that a blockade of this magnitude will undoubtedly cause short-term economic pain on a global scale. But they view that pain as a necessary sacrifice. The underlying strategic mechanism is to sever Iran's primary source of sovereign revenue, which is its oil exports. The administration argues this is the most effective method to defund proxy groups, prevent potential future attacks on Western infrastructure, and ensure long-term global security.
Well, I was reading the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, their dispatch on this, and they have already downgraded the economic growth forecast for the United Kingdom, and they are pointing directly to this blockade.
Immediate ripple effects.
Yeah, they are warning about a massive surge in inflation, crippling supply chain disruptions, and the very real threat of recession for literally any economy heavily reliant on imported energy.
The mechanics of that IMF downgrade reveal the fragility of our interconnected economies, right? Because it's not just the sheer volume of oil missing from the market.
What else is it?
When you introduce a naval blockade in a region that handles roughly a fifth of the world's oil, maritime insurance premiums for any vessel entering the Persian Gulf absolutely skyrocket.
Of course. The insurance companies panic.
Yeah, and those increased shipping costs are immediately baked into the price of crude oil futures. So as energy prices spike, the cost of manufacturing raw goods increases, the cost of transporting those goods across the ocean increases, and ultimately, everyday consumers bear the brunt of that inflation at the grocery store.
And, nature abhors a vacuum. We are already seeing countermoves. While the U.S. is attempting to isolate Iranian oil, reporting shows that Russia has publicly offered to step in and replace those Iranian crude supplies for China.
Which is a huge geopolitical pivot.
Right. And simultaneously, Chinese diplomats are holding high-level meetings in Beijing right now to navigate the crisis, trying to secure alternative energy route.
Which introduces a massive secondary consequence to the blockade.
How so?
Well, the intended goal is the economic isolation of Iran, but the practical result might be the accelerated realignment of global trade alliances. If China and Russia build alternative energy supply chains that completely bypass Western financial systems and maritime routes, it fundamentally alters the balance of global economic power.
So, My question to you is, how long can the global economy sustain this level of pressure before something just snaps? If this blockade creates a domino effect that hits a family's heating bill in London, slows down factory production in Asia, and delays shipping worldwide, where is the breaking point?
The breaking point occurs when inflation outpaces wage growth so severely that consumer spending just collapses.
Right.
Economies with robust domestic energy production, like the United States, have a buffer. But developing nations, or those in Europe that are highly dependent on imports, they feel the friction almost immediately. The U.S. strategy is essentially a high-stakes wager. They are betting that the economic pain will force Iran to the diplomatic table before that global economic snap triggers a worldwide recession.
It is a massive gamble. And while global alliances are shifting over physical energy resources, we are seeing an equally intense friction at the intersection of religion and politics. We have new reporting covering escalating tension between U.S. President Donald Trump and Pope Leo XIV.
This is fascinating because the intersection of domestic political policy and global theological leadership always creates incredible friction.
It really does. So the current situation intensified significantly after a 60 Minutes report broadcast remarks made by the Pope. He was speaking broadly regarding immigration, the necessity of social justice, and the moral responsibilities that wealthy democratic nations bear toward the global poor.
Right.
And President Trump responded directly to the broadcast, asserting that the pontiff should refrain from engaging in political matters and border policies.
But it didn't stop at a verbal exchange, did it?
No, it did not. President Trump subsequently posted an artificial intelligence-generated image of himself standing shoulder to shoulder with Jesus Christ.
Wow.
Yeah. That single post sparked a massive wave of backlash. It wasn't just the Vatican issuing statements. Various media outlets and even several Republican senators publicly expressed deep discomfort with the imagery.
To process this objectively, we really have to examine the clashing frameworks of these two institutions. And it's important to note this is a recurring historical theme.
Really? Like who else?
Oh, we saw friction between former U.S. President George W. Bush and Pope John Paul II regarding the invasion of Iraq. We saw it between President Trump and Pope Francis over border wall proposals previously.
Right, so it's not new.
Not at all. The papacy operates on a timeline measured in centuries, advocating from a framework of global Catholic social doctrine, which heavily emphasizes humanitarian safety nets, the protection of migrants, and environmental stewardship.
Okay, and the president?
Conversely, a U.S. president operates on a strict 4-year political timeline. They are prioritizing national sovereignty, border security, and domestic economic interests. Those two mandates are inherently designed to collide.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
The part that fascinates me, though, is the impact on the electorate. If you are a conservative Catholic voter in the United States right now, you are caught in this incredible tug of war.
Oh, absolutely.
You have your political allegiance and domestic policy preferences on one side, and then the spiritual leadership of your church on the other.
The cognitive dissonance for that specific demographic is profound. They are forced to weigh whether they prioritize the political outcomes that align with their domestic views or the moral guidings emanating from Rome. Furthermore, the use of an AI-generated image of Jesus acts as an accelerant to the controversy.
It really pours gasoline on it.
It does. It blends modern, synthetic technological manipulation with deeply sacred religious iconography. It forces a public conversation about where the boundary lies between savvy political branding and religious reverence.
Speaking of domestic policies colliding with global realities, let's look at how we manage our own backyards. We just discussed the high-stakes naval blockade over oil, but domestically, the energy transition is just as contentious.
Oh, definitely.
In the U.S., the state of Iowa has passed a highly controversial new law. This legislation specifically shields farmers and ethanol plants from being sued over air pollution and emissions.
The underlying logic of that legislation is entirely driven by the agricultural economy of the American Midwest.
Right.
The ethanol industry is an economic pillar there, and agriculture, specifically livestock, is a major producer of greenhouse gases.
I'm just going to be blunt. We're talking about cow farts.
Aha. Yes, we are.
It sounds absurd to say out loud, but we literally have state legislatures writing complex legal protections for the liabilities of bovine digestion.
It does sound ridiculous, but the chemistry behind it is deadly serious. Cattle digestion produces immense amounts of methane, and as a greenhouse gas, methane is incredibly potent.
How potent?
Well, over a 20-year period, it is roughly 80 times more effective at trapping heat in the atmosphere than carbon dioxide.
80 times? That's insane.
Yeah. So the legislation in Iowa is a defensive measure. It's designed to protect its traditional economic base, agriculture, and biofuels from environmental litigation that could potentially bankrupt local industries.
But look at the sheer contrast globally, right? While Iowa is passing laws to protect agricultural emissions, reporting shows that Colombia, in South America, has just taken a radical step. They've declared their entire Amazon region a fossil-free zone.
A massive policy shift.
Yeah, they are implementing a permanent ban on the exploration and extraction of fossil fuels in that area.
It's a huge pivot. Colombia is prioritizing long-term biodiversity and global climate mitigation over the immediate economic windfall of resource extraction. And this stark contrast, Iowa protecting traditional energy models while Colombia bans them entirely, it perfectly sets the stage for the upcoming COP31 climate summit.
Right, which we have confirmation on the location for now.
Yes, the venue for the COP31 Leaders Summit will be Antalya, Turkey. The Turkish Environment Minister, Murat Kurum, is already pushing to generate political momentum ahead of the gathering.
And they made a really interesting choice for their youth champion for the summit. They appointed Sally Higgins. She is an Australian cattle farmer, which is just a brilliant, subtle nod to the exact agricultural emissions debate we just discussed with Iowa.
It's a very smart move. Having a cattle farmer as a youth champion at a global climate summit forces the conversation away from abstract policy and right into the practical realities of how we feed the world while managing methane.
It shows how intensely fractured our physical resource management is right now. But, here is the thing that really keeps me up at night.
What's that?
While nations are fighting naval blockades over oil and arguing over land use and cattle, there is a quiet, completely invisible war escalating right beneath the ocean and inside our computer networks.
Yeah. We are transitioning from the physical battlegrounds of energy to the digital battlegrounds of code.
Let's start with Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan.
Yeah.
This is a man who manages trillions of dollars. He does not panic easily.
No, he doesn't.
But he has publicly sounded the alarm on Anthropic's new artificial intelligence model, which is called Mythos. Dimon is warning that this specific AI model can uncover software vulnerabilities faster than human engineers can write the code to patch them.
He is highlighting the acceleration of the zero-day arms race.
For anyone listening who might not be in tech, what exactly is a zero-day?
For clarity, a zero-day vulnerability is a critical flaw in software or hardware that the original manufacturer is completely unaware of. Because they have had literally 0 days to fix it, malicious actors can exploit it immediately.
Oh.
Historically, discovering these vulnerabilities required incredibly skilled human engineers spending weeks or months manually combing through source code or reverse engineering software.
But how does an AI like Mythos change that equation? Is just reading the code faster than a human?
It's far more sophisticated than just reading fast. AI models like Mythos use techniques like advanced fuzzing and symbolic execution.
Awesome.
Yeah, fuzzing. They can bombard a banking system or an infrastructure grid with millions of varied random inputs per second, looking for anomalous behaviors that indicate a backdoor or a memory leak. They recognize complex patterns in machine code instantly.
Which makes AI the ultimate double-edged sword.
Exactly. It is the ultimate offensive weapon capable of finding and exploiting vulnerabilities at machine speed. But it's also the ultimate defensive shield, because cybersecurity firms are deploying similar AI models to hunt for those exact same flaws to patch them before the bad actors arrive.
So it's AI versus AI.
Right. And Jamie Dimon's core concern is an asymmetry in deployment. If an offensive AI finds a flaw in a global banking system in 3 seconds, but the human engineers take 48 hours to write, test, and deploy the patch, that is a 48-hour window where the financial system is completely compromised. The offense is outpacing the defense.
That is terrifying. But while we are all staring at our screens, terrified that an AI is going to execute a zero-day attack on our bank accounts, I want to look at the actual physical internet. Because the internet isn't magic. It is physical cables lying on the bottom of the ocean.
Very true. We forget that.
And China recently tested a deep-sea vessel called the Haiyang-DZ-2. The reporting notes it is equipped with a submarine cable cutter capable of operating at 3,500 meters deep.
Yeah, it utilizes an advanced deep-sea electrohydrostatic actuator to provide the shearing force necessary at those extreme depths.
So I have to ask you, are we suffering from misdirected anxiety here? We are wringing our hands over AI 0 days. But what happens if the submarine just literally snips the fiber optic wire connecting the global internet? Are we overthinking the digital threat and completely ignoring the brute force physical one?
The reality is that national security apparatuses are forced to plan for both simultaneously. It's a bifurcated threat landscape. The global internet is profoundly physical. Massive fiber optic cables traverse the ocean floor, carrying upwards of 95% of all international data.
95%.
Yeah, we are talking about global financial transactions, encrypted military communications, and logistics networks. If a state actor uses a deep-sea cutter at 3,500 meters to sever multiple critical cables simultaneously, the disruption to the global economy is instantaneous and catastrophic.
And you can't just send an IT guy to fix it.
Exactly. Repairing a severed cable at the bottom of the Mariana Trench is exponentially more difficult and time-consuming than pushing a software update. You have to defend the software from the AI, and you have to defend the physical infrastructure from the submarines.
It is exhausting just thinking about the vulnerabilities, but, AI isn't solely existing in this realm of high-stakes cyber warfare. It is rapidly seeping into our mundane daily routines, too.
It's everywhere now.
Like, Google Chrome is launching a new feature called Skills. It basically allows users to save and reuse AI prompts directly within their web browser.
This represents a massive psychological milestone in human-computer interaction. We're watching AI transition from being viewed as a novelty or a specialized developer tool right into a fundamental utility integrated into the fabric of daily work.
Like using a calculator.
Yes. The tech industry refers to this as prompt engineering. It's the acquired skill of knowing exactly how to structure a query to an AI to yield the most accurate and useful output. By integrating this capability directly into Google Chrome, a browser utilized by billions of people, prompt engineering is shifting from a niche technical proficiency into a mainstream everyday habit.
It will just become the new baseline, like knowing how to formulate a search engine query or format a spreadsheet. And as we weave these digital tools into our daily habits, we're also taking the next step, literally weaving them into our biology.
Right, the BCI developments.
Yes. Max Hodak's company, ScienceCore, just announced they are preparing to implant their first sensor directly into a human brain. They have secured backing of about $490 million, and the initial clinical targets are spinal cord and brain injuries.
Max Hodak brings significant pedigree to this, having been one of the co-founders of Neuralink before launching ScienceCore. What we are observing here is the rapid evolution of brain-computer interfaces, or BCIs.
How does that actually work on a biological level?
The fundamental premise of a BCI is translating the electrochemical action potentials, basically the signals your neurons fire, into binary digital commands that a computer system can process, and vice versa.
Okay, to make sure I understand the mechanics of this.
Yeah.
If someone has a severed spinal cord, their brain is still generating the command to walk, right? But the physical pathway down to the legs is broken.
Yeah, that is the precise medical challenge, yes. The BCI essentially acts as a neurological bypass. Think of it like having a highly advanced bilingual translator sitting between two people who speak different languages. The sensor implanted in the brain picks up the motor intent, which is the chemical language of the brain. It translates that intent into digital language, bypasses the damaged section of the spinal cord entirely, and transmits the command wirelessly to an external prosthetic device.
Or like a robotic exoskeleton.
Exactly. Or, theoretically, directly to an implant stimulating the nerves in the limbs themselves. The fact that human trials are commencing for these advanced sensors indicates we are actively crossing the threshold from speculative science fiction into viable, life-altering medical therapeutics. We are beginning to master our own biology.
Which naturally leads us to humanity's ultimate mastery of our environment. Because once we have begun to conquer our biological limitations and our digital tools, the only direction left to expand is off the planet entirely.
Up to the stars.
Let's talk about what is happening above our heads, starting with the NASA Artemis II mission.
The return to crewed lunar exploration is arguably the defining scientific endeavor of this decade.
Astronauts Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, and Jeremy Hansen just successfully splashed down in the ocean. The footage of them emerging from the Orion capsule was incredibly emotional. And what fascinates me is the cultural ripple effect. The splashdown was even parodied on Saturday Night Live.
Right, and an SNL skit might seem trivial to some, but it is actually a brilliant barometer of cultural relevance. If a late-night comedy show is dedicating resources to parody a NASA mission, it proves that space exploration has firmly re-entered the mainstream cultural zeitgeist in a way we haven't seen since the Apollo era.
That's a really good point.
And what is truly fascinating here is the distinct contrast in public relations strategies between NASA and private space enterprises. Consider Elon Musk's SpaceX or Jeff Bezos's Blue Origin. Their public narratives are almost entirely centered on the engineering hardware.
Yeah, it's all about the rockets.
It's about the immense thrust of the engines, the economics of reusability, catching massive boosters out of the sky with mechanical arms.
But NASA took an entirely different route with Artemis II.
They absolutely did. NASA is winning the cultural narrative by focusing the spotlight almost entirely on the humanity of space travel. They emphasize the diverse backgrounds of the crew, the emotional toll the isolation takes on their families back on Earth, the profound psychological awe of witnessing the Earth rise from lunar orbit.
Making it about the people, not the metal.
Exactly. They are actively reminding the public that space travel isn't just about cold thermodynamics and orbital mechanics. It is about the human spirit pushing into the hostile unknown. Hardware eventually becomes outdated, but the narrative of human exploration resonates on a primal emotional level.
But we can't ignore the hardware entirely, especially when you look at what Japan is proposing. The reporting details a Japanese company that wants to build a massive solar panel ring completely encircling the moon's equator to beam energy back to Earth.
A literal ring around the moon.
I mean, talk about humanity trying to put a ring on it. But seriously, how does that even function physically? Are we running a cosmic extension cord back to the electrical grid?
Haha. Thankfully, no physical cables are required. While the concept sounds like pure science fiction, the physics underpinning space-based solar power are theoretically very sound. Here on Earth, terrestrial solar panels are fundamentally limited.
Because of nighttime.
Yeah, they are subject to the day-night cycle, weather patterns, cloud cover, and the atmosphere itself, which absorbs and scatters a significant percentage of the sun's raw energy before it ever even hits the panel.
Right, a massive solar farm doesn't do much good in the middle of a blizzard.
Precisely the issue. But a continuous ring of solar panels positioned on the lunar equator would have near constant, unfiltered access to high-intensity solar radiation.
So how do we get the power back here?
The infrastructure would generate massive amounts of electricity, convert that direct current into microwaves or highly focused lasers, and then beam that energy wirelessly through the vacuum of space. Down here on Earth, we would build massive receiver stations, which are called rectennas, to catch that beamed energy and feed it into the grid.
That sounds dangerous, like a microwave death ray.
Well, the frequency's spread out so it wouldn't fry a bird flying through it, but it carries a lot of energy. Because microwaves pass straight through our atmosphere and weather systems with minimal energy loss, it would theoretically provide a constant, uninterrupted baseload source of clean energy. The logistical and financial hurdles of constructing a megastructure on the moon are astronomical, but the fundamental physics work.
It is just incredible ambition. But while Japan is looking at the moon for energy, NASA's SphereX mission is looking much, much further away. They have been mapping the Cygnus X region of the Milky Way, and they have identified what they are calling interstellar glaciers. We're talking about vast complexes of ice that are 600 light years across.
And it is crucial to understand that this isn't just frozen water floating in the void. The spectroscopic data from SphereX reveals that these interstellar ices contain water, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, and complex polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons.
Which are essentially the fundamental building blocks of life, right?
They are the exact chemical prerequisites. When we look at the broader mechanics of how solar systems form, these icy dust particles residing in dense stellar nurseries eventually coalesce under gravity to form protoplanets.
So they're like seeds.
Exactly. By mapping these colossal interstellar glaciers, the SphereX mission is essentially showing us the chemical pantry that the universe utilizes to seed new solar systems. It provides physical evidence that the ingredients necessary for biological life aren't a localized anomaly unique to Earth. They are suspended in massive frozen clouds across the entire galaxy, waiting to be incorporated into a new world.
And before we leave the cosmos, the reporting includes a really poignant historical detour I want to mention. A physicist named Arthur J. Ruhlig. Back in 1938, while working at the University of Michigan in the United States, he actually discovered deuterium-tritium nuclear fusion.
A massive discovery.
Yes. This is the exact fusion reaction that scientists globally are trying to harness today to create infinite clean energy. But his discovery was completely overshadowed by the onset of World War II, the Manhattan Project, and the urgent rush to weaponize atomic energy. The scientific community is only now properly recognizing his work.
It serves as a profound reminder that the trajectory of scientific progress is rarely a straight line. Sometimes, world-changing discoveries are made, but if the geopolitical timing is wrong, or the immediate societal priorities are shifted toward conflict, those discoveries just get buried in the academic archives.
Just lost to time.
Yeah. Rulig was observing and understanding the fundamental energy mechanism of the stars decades before humanity possessed the technological infrastructure to even attempt replicating it on a commercial scale.
Which brings us to a terrifying realization. We look to the stars for our future, we study their origins, we look to them for clean energy, but the stars are also looking back at us. And our closest star, the sun, is incredibly volatile. We have to talk about space weather and the invisible threats bombarding our planet.
Space weather is perhaps the most under-discussed existential threat to modern infrastructure.
So, the European Space Agency, the ESA, operates a spacecraft called Eclipse. And Eclipse just sent back telemetry data revealing that solar wind travels up to 4 times faster than our previous scientific models predicted.
To grasp why this data revision is so alarming, we have to understand the mechanics of solar wind. The sun is not a static object, right? It is constantly blasting out a continuous stream of charged particles, electrons, and protons into the solar system.
Okay.
When the sun experiences a massive magnetic eruption, which is known as a coronal mass ejection, or CME, it hurls a dense, highly magnetized cloud of these charged particles directly toward Earth. Our planet's magnetic field usually deflects the brunt of it, which is what creates the auroras at the poles.
The northern lights.
Exactly. But if a massive direct hit storm occurs, the sheer volume of charged particles interacts with our magnetic field and induces massive, uncontrolled direct electrical currents in our long-distance power lines and transformers.
So if the ESA is telling us that this solar wind is traveling 4 times faster than we thought, that means our warning time for a catastrophic event just got severely slashed.
Drastically. Our terrestrial forecasting models, the systems utility companies use to protect the grid, are predicated on specific speed assumptions. If a severe coronal mass ejection is moving 4 times faster, instead of having a day or two to strategically power down vulnerable grid components, we might only have a matter of hours from the moment the eruption is detected.
And that leads directly into a new report warning about the worst-case scenario of a severe solar storm. The report bluntly states that a massive event could cripple global electrical and digital grids simultaneously. They are specifically warning of potential panic buying, the collapse of supply chains, and subsequent public unrest.
If we tie this back to everything we have analyzed today, the AI prompt engineering integrated into browsers, the deep-sea fiber optic cables running global finance, the maritime logistics tracking ships through the Strait of Hormuz, every single facet of our modern civilization requires uninterrupted electricity and digital connectivity.
We are so dependent.
Completely. We have built a society entirely dependent on incredibly fragile, interconnected systems.
Just think about the practical applications. You have companies like Waymo launching autonomous robo-taxis in major cities like London. What happens to a massive fleet of AI-driven electric vehicles if a solar storm takes out the GPS satellite constellation and fries the local power grid at the exact same moment?
It's a mess.
They instantly become heavy metal bricks blocking every major intersection.
The cascading failures would be instantaneous. Global shipping halts because the ports cannot process the digital manifests. The banking systems go entirely offline because the server farms lose power and their backup generators eventually run out of diesel. AI models cannot run. A severe solar storm, something on the magnitude of the 1859 Carrington event, would essentially act as a massive electromagnetic pulse, destroying high-voltage transformers worldwide. The modern world would simply stop in its tracks.
Okay, you are painting a legitimately terrifying picture of societal collapse here. So I have to ask for some perspective. Is this a liquidate your retirement accounts and build an underground bunker level of threat? Or is this a keep some extra bottled water and batteries in the garage level of threat? How do we actually prepare for this reality without just succumbing to panic?
It is much closer to keep extra water in the garage, but the real preparation must happen on a macro-national policy level. It means governments and utility companies need to aggressively invest in hardening our electrical grids against geomagnetic induction.
Like shielding the transformers.
Yes, exactly. And it means engineering robust redundancies into our satellite networks. For the average individual, though, it serves as a stark reminder of personal resilience. Keep some physical cash on hand in case card readers go down, have a backup water supply, and foster strong community ties with your neighbors. Panic is never a viable strategy, but informed, measured preparation is essential. We have engineered a beautiful, staggeringly complex digital world, but we really must acknowledge the brutal physical vulnerabilities of the universe we reside in.
It is a massive amount of information to process. Let's synthesize this journey we have been on today for everyone listening. We started by looking at the physical footprints of our past, a 6,200-year-old stone megastructure built by ancient hands in the Middle East, and a bronze goddess pulled from the crushing depths of the Titanic wreck.
We covered a lot of ground.
We did. We navigated the incredibly precarious geopolitics of the global oil markets, the naval blockade in the Strait of Hormuz, and the shifting energy transitions from Iowa to Colombia. We examined the invisible, escalating wars of AI, zero-day vulnerabilities, and deep-sea submarines capable of cutting the internet's physical cables. And we ended up staring into the cosmos, discussing the chemical origins of life in interstellar glaciers, proposals for solar rings around the moon, and the very real threat of hyperfast solar winds turning our modern lights off.
What stands out to me across all these stories is the intense dual nature of humanity. We are incredibly innovative creatures, capable of launching humans around the moon, decoding the genetic evolution of a 550-million-year-old soft-bodied sponge, and bypassing severed spinal cords with computer chips.
Yeah, we're pretty smart.
We are. But simultaneously, we remain incredibly fragile. We are entirely reliant on thin fiber optic cables lying in the mud, complex maritime insurance markets, and the mercy of a volatile star, which leaves us with a rather profound question to consider.
What is the final thought you want to leave us with?
Well, if an ancient society from 6,200 years ago left behind a stone megastructure that we, with all our technology, are still struggling to fully understand today, what will archaeologists 6,000 years from now think when they dig up our underwater internet cables or point their telescopes at the decaying ruins of a solar panel ring around the moon? When they analyze our physical footprint, will they see a civilization that successfully mastered its universe? Or will they see one that was incredibly precariously fragile?
That is a thought that is going to linger. When we bury our modern time capsules, whether they are made of bronze sitting at the bottom of the Atlantic or made of vast amounts of data floating in a server farm, we do not get to dictate how the future interprets them. We just leave the mark, adapt as best we can to the storms, and hope we survive long enough to explain it. Thank you to everyone listening for joining us on this deep dive. Staying informed about the complexities of our world doesn't have to be overwhelming. It just takes the right perspective. We will catch you next time.
Enjoying Artificially Informed.
Hit subscribe and share it with a friend.
From the left, the right, and straight from the algorithm.
Thank you.
Welcome to the debate. Today, we are looking at the global geopolitical and economic fallout of current Western containment strategies. Specifically, we're examining the U.S. naval blockade in the Strait of Hormuz and Israel's ongoing military campaigns.
Right, and we're drawing from a really broad collection of recent global reporting here. We've synthesized intelligence from the International Monetary Fund, the UN Development Program, as well as reporting from the Washington Post, the BBC, and RT.
Yeah, it's a lot of ground to cover. And the central question we're trying to answer today is this. Does aggressive military and economic containment actually work?
Right.
Does it effectively force adversaries to the negotiating table to secure, long-term stability? Or, and this is the flip side, does it permanently fracture the global economy and accelerate a multipolar realignment toward the BRICS nations?
Anymore. When you look at it from a planetary perspective, the economic and political shockwaves, they're hitting everyone from Latin America to Southeast Asia.
Mm-hmm.
The decisions being made in Washington and London right now are literally rewriting the global order.
They really are. And, well, I approach this from a security-first perspective. My read of the situation is that aggressive deterrence, and yes, the short-term economic pain that comes with it, is an absolutely necessary prerequisite.
Okay.
You need that intense pressure to force historic diplomatic breakthroughs and actually neutralize threats.
Well, I come at it from a different way. When you zoom out and look at this globally, these containment strategies are causing catastrophic economic collateral damage across the planet. And strategically, they aren't securing Western influence at all.
You don't think so?
No, they are actively driving the global South into alternative permanent alliances with Russia and China.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. Deterrence is never meant to be painless.
Sure.
It is designed to fundamentally alter the calculus of your adversary. For decades, the international community tried appeasement, right? We engaged in endless circular negotiations that yielded Honestly, no sustainable security.
But at what cost?
We'll look at what the U.S. naval blockade of Iranian ports and Israel's uncompromising military pressure are doing right now. They are producing tangible results.
You're talking about a strategy that essentially weaponizes the entire global economy.
The U.S. Treasury Secretary recently asserted that short-term economic pain is a worthwhile trade-off for long-term security. And honestly, the evidence supports this.
Does it, though?
Yeah, look at what these pressures have achieved. We're seeing rare direct negotiations between Israel and Lebanon taking place right now in Washington, D.C., and the U.S. and Iran have been brought to the absolute brink of a potential ceasefire.
Right, but...
When adversaries realize that the cost of defiance is simply higher than the cost of diplomacy, they finally sit down at the table.
But that phrase, short-term pain, is a profoundly Western luxury. It's this sanitized term that entirely ignores the devastating planetary consequences of these actions.
The global economy always experiences friction during a security crisis, though.
It's way beyond friction. The International Monetary Fund has issued stark warnings that this conflict is dragging the entire global economy toward recession. I mean, Arab economies are facing a catastrophic $194 billion hit.
Wow. That's...
Yeah, it's massive. And the UK is facing the biggest growth downgrade among major economies directly because of the Iran war. And it's not just the big players.
Right, the developing nations.
Exactly. The UN Development Program Chief has literally called this conflict development in reverse. By weaponizing the global financial and maritime systems, the West is successfully pushing massive economies like Indonesia and China deeper into Russia's economic orbit. You call it deterrence, but I call it the acceleration of a post-Western world order.
Let's delve into the mechanics of that so-called weaponization, because I think the Strait of Hormuz is the perfect case study of why this is necessary.
Okay, let's look at it.
If you're listening and wondering why Hormuz matters so much, it is the ultimate geographical choke point. It's this incredibly narrow strip of water where roughly 20% of the world's oil passes every single day.
Which is exactly why blocking it sends the global economy into a tailspin.
But historically, Iran has used its geographical positioning over that strait as a sword hanging over the global economy. By stepping in, CENTCOM, the U.S. Central Command, successfully halted Iranian maritime trade within 36 hours.
36 hours, yeah.
They deployed naval assets, turned back merchant ships, and effectively neutralized Iran's geographical advantage. Look, if you want to bring a state sponsor of regional instability to the table, you have to cut off their economic oxygen.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. You are describing this blockade as an airtight enforcement mechanism, like a steel wall on the water.
Right.
But the reality is completely different. It is highly porous, and the economic blowback is hitting the enforcers way harder than the targets.
How is it porous? The U.S. Navy is actively patrolling the corridor.
Because they aren't just dealing with traditional naval fleets anymore. BBC Verify recently tracked 15 major commercial vessels crossing the strait right under the nose of the blockade.
Wait, how are 15 massive commercial vessels slipping past a U.S. naval blockade? Are they just like sailing in the dead of night?
No, it's a digital evasion tactic. They use something called spoofing.
Spoofing.
Yeah. Every large ship is equipped with an automatic identification system, or AIS. It broadcasts the ship's location, speed, and heading to avoid collisions. Well, Iran's shadow fleet uses sophisticated hardware to manipulate that AIS data.
Ah, I see.
So on a naval radar monitor, it looks like a ship is sailing peacefully in the Indian Ocean. But physically, that ghost ship is loading smuggled oil in the Persian Gulf.
So it's essentially a massive game of digital hide-and-seek.
Exactly, but a highly dangerous one. When you have massive oil tankers falsifying their coordinates in a heavily militarized zone, a single miscalculation or a physical collision could trigger a hot war. And while we play this cat and mouse game, the global citizen pays the price.
In what way, specifically?
Through supply chain strain. Because of the blockade and the military risk, global shipping companies has to reroute vessels. Insurance companies like those in Lloyd's of London skyrocket their war risk premiums.
Which makes sense from a risk perspective.
Sure, but those costs don't just vanish. They get passed directly to the consumer. U.S. wholesale prices just surged 4% in a single month, driven by these soaring energy and shipping costs.
Right.
When the UN Development Program calls this development in reverse, They mean that decades of poverty alleviation and global economic integration are just being wiped out.
Okay, think of the blockade not as a wall, but as an economic tourniquet.
A tourniquet.
Yes. Yes, it cuts off circulation. Yes, it is intentionally painful to the surrounding tissue, causing those wholesale price surges and supply chain strains you just mentioned. But when a patient has a fatal hemorrhage of regional stability, it is the only way to save them.
I mean, a tourniquet is a striking analogy, but
The friction you are describing isn't a flaw in the strategy. That friction is the exact reason why diplomatic channels are suddenly opening up.
the global economy isn't a single body where you can just clamp down on one limb without suffocating the whole system.
But look at the diplomatic progress it's forcing. The economic pressure established in the Strait of Hormuz is the direct catalyst for what we are seeing in Washington, D.C. right now.
You mean the Israel-Lebanon talks?
Yes. We have historic, U.S.-mediated talks between Israel and Lebanon, facilitated by Marco Rubio. These are the first direct talks between these nations since 1993.
Historic on paper, maybe.
They are actively in the same room, discussing maritime borders, energy exploration in the Mediterranean, and fundamentally, the disarmament of Hezbollah. You don't get those kinds of concessions without immense pressure.
Right, but
Even Donald Trump has indicated that the U.S.-Iran war is very close to being over. You get historic negotiations by applying a tourniquet until the adversary realizes they have no other option but to negotiate.
we have to look at what those negotiations actually represent on the ground, though. You are pointing to a sterile meeting room in Washington, D.C., and calling it peace.
It's the start of peace.
Experts on Middle Eastern politics are calling these Israel-Lebanon talks largely symbolic and performative.
How can discussing the disarmament of Hezbollah be performative? It's literally the core issue.
Because of the reality unfolding outside that room. While these diplomats shake hands, Israel continues heavy airstrikes in Beirut. Hezbollah continues firing rockets.
War is messy.
It's beyond messy. We are looking at a staggering human toll here. Over 2,124 Lebanese are dead, and 1.2 million people have been displaced from their homes. Entire communities in southern Lebanon are being systematically destroyed.
The humanitarian toll is severe, I'm not ignoring that. But military exhaustion is often the precursor to lasting treaties.
But diplomacy conducted under the threat of complete decimation isn't peace. It's extortion.
Extortion is a strong word.
When a population is subjected to this level of trauma and mass displacement, you are not neutralizing a threat. You are creating the exact conditions that breed future insurgencies.
A teenager whose home was destroyed today doesn't care about a maritime border treaty signed in Washington. Extortion might yield a temporary pause in violence, but it does not yield sustainable security.
Well, you use the word extortion, I use the word leverage.
Leverage.
The reality of international relations, particularly in a region as historically volatile as the Middle East, is that peace is rarely born from mutual goodwill. It is almost always forged in the fires of military reality.
The Lebanese government is sitting at that table because the military and economic pressure has made the cost of hosting Hezbollah's operations unbearable.
So the strategy is to make the country collapse so the government is forced to act?
The strategy is to align interests. The Israeli ambassador to the U.S. stated that both nations are united in liberating Lebanon from Hezbollah's control. That is a profound strategic alignment that would have been completely unthinkable without the aggressive military posture we are discussing.
Okay, but
And regarding Iran, the fact that mediators are moving closer to extending a ceasefire, despite the profound mistrust on both sides, shows that the blockade is working. The leverage is forcing pragmatism over ideology.
But your definition of pragmatism is incredibly short-sighted. And this brings us to the most critical global consequence of this strategy.
Which is?
The failure of this forced, Western-led diplomacy is exactly what is driving the rest of the world to build a parallel economic system. We are watching the geopolitical map being actively redrawn around the West.
You're referring to the BRICS realignment.
Exactly. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and their new partners. Let's look at what's happening while the U.S. is busy enforcing its blockade. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is in Beijing boosting a no-limits partnership with China.
Right.
And how is Russia capitalizing on the Hormuz blockade? They are stepping in to offer oil relief to China to help them bypass U.S. sanctions.
Well, Russia and China have always had a strategic relationship. That's not exactly new.
True, but it goes beyond to China. Look at Indonesia. Here is a massive, developing economy, a recently inducted BRICS partner that has traditionally sourced a huge portion of its oil from the Middle East. Because of the volatility and the blockade in Hormuz, Indonesia has now struck a key energy deal for crude and liquefied petroleum gas directly with Russia.
Which makes sense on a purely immediate logistical level. If Middle Eastern oil is tied up or just too expensive, you buy from whoever's selling.
It's more than logistics, though. By utilizing economic pain as a weapon, the West is providing the perfect incentive for the global South to de-dollarize.
Let's pause there, because de-dollarization is a term thrown around a lot. How exactly does an oil deal between Indonesia and Russia bypass Western influence?
So, traditionally, global oil is priced and sold in US dollars. If Indonesia wants to buy oil, they need dollars.
Right.
That means their transactions must pass through the Western financial system, specifically the SWIFT banking network. SWIFT is basically the messaging system that banks use to securely transfer money across borders. When the U.S. uses its control of that system to lock countries out, it weaponizes the dollar.
Right, which is a powerful non-kinetic tool to enforce international norms.
But it forces innovation among those locked out. De-dollarization means Indonesia and Russia agree to bypass SWIFT entirely. They establish bilateral trade using their own local currencies, or perhaps the Chinese yuan.
Okay.
They build new financial clearinghouses. They lay new physical pipelines. By aggressively containing these nations, the West is accelerating their motivation to build alternative supply chains and permanently bypass Western financial and maritime influence.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. It is very easy to look at a few opportunistic trade deals and declare the end of the Western-led order. But the macroeconomic fundamentals tell a completely different story.
How so? The IMF just decided to raise Russia's growth outlook to 1.1%, despite massive Western sanctions. That parallel economy seems far more resilient than Western policymakers anticipated.
Resilient in the short term, maybe. But the Russia-China-Indonesia energy deals are alliances of convenience.
Convenience?
Yes, they are born of immediate market disruption, not some shared long-term vision. Russia is selling discounted oil because it desperately needs cash to fund a war economy. Indonesia is buying it because it's cheap.
Right.
That does not equate to a stable, cohesive ideological bloc.
But infrastructure built out of convenience eventually becomes permanent. Once a nation builds a new financial clearinghouse, they don't just dismantle it when Western sanctions are lifted. The trust in the US dollar as a neutral reserve currency is broken.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because it ignores China's actual economic position. Despite Beijing's rhetoric calling the U.S. blockade dangerous and irresponsible, the Chinese economy remains fundamentally reliant on Western consumer markets.
They are trying to stimulate their domestic consumption, though.
They are trying, but it isn't working. We saw this clearly at their recent massive trade fair. Export growth was visibly struggling amid weak global demand. A complete decoupling from the West is simply unfeasible for China.
Unfeasible?
Completely. Their domestic consumer base isn't wealthy enough to buy all the goods their factories produce. They need the US and European markets to survive and keep their economy afloat.
So you're arguing that BRICS can't replace the Western system because they don't have the consumer spending power to sustain each other?
Exactly. Building a parallel global system requires capital, trust, and shared values. Three things the BRICS nations fundamentally lack in their internal dynamics. India and China have active military disputes on their border. Russia's economy is highly concentrated and vulnerable to the very commodity price fluctuations we are discussing. So while BRICS might offer a temporary pressure valve for sanctioned oil, it does not possess the institutional architecture to replace the Western economic order.
But you're assuming the current Western economic order remains stable while it actively disrupts the globe.
The global economic system is underwritten by the U.S. Navy's commitment to freedom of navigation.
Ironically, the blockade in Hormuz is ultimately trying to restore that freedom by punishing bad actors who threaten it.
Wait, by blocking a strait, you're restoring freedom of navigation? Security must precede trade. If the Strait of Hormuz is left vulnerable to Iranian spoofing and shadow fleets without consequence, the global economy suffers anyway. The aggressive enforcement we are seeing is defending the rules-based order that allows global trade to function in the first place.
Defending a rules-based order by unilaterally blockading international waters and causing global supply chain crises is a contradiction in terms. And when we look at this from a planetary perspective, we have to acknowledge who is actually bearing the brunt of this.
Who do you mean? I mean, the nations that have absolutely no say in the security decisions made in Washington or London. Look at the small island developing states in the Pacific or emerging economies in Latin America and Africa. They sit at the very tail end of these disrupted global supply chains. When fuel and shipping costs soar because of a blockade in the Middle East, their development stalls. They are held hostage by a geopolitical chess match they have no part in.
That is an unfortunate reality of an interconnected world.
It's more than unfortunate. It's a strategic vulnerability for the West. It highlights a system where Western security imperatives dictate the economic survival of the global South. That is precisely why the appeal of a multipolar world, one backed by BRICS, is growing so rapidly in Latin America and Africa. They don't want to be collateral damage to Western deterrence anymore.
It is a harsh reality, but global stability requires an anchor. When that anchor shifts to address a severe threat, the ripples are felt everywhere. But let us bring this back to the core debate as we wrap up today.
Sure.
My position remains that order in a chaotic world requires decisive, sometimes economically painful enforcement. The combination of military deterrence and targeted blockades is not a failure of diplomacy, it is the engine of it.
Okay.
It forces direct talks between historic enemies like Israel and Lebanon and pushes Iran to the table. The tourniquet is doing its job.
And my position remains that this strategy is tragically myopic. By relying on brute economic and military force, the current approach is causing profound suffering on a global scale. It treats the economies of developing nations as acceptable collateral damage. And rather than securing Western influence, it is actively accelerating its decline by driving the global South to build a multipolar world that will eventually bypass Western influence entirely. The tourniquet may stop the bleeding in one specific spot, but it is causing severe damage to the rest of the body.
This has been a profound exploration of the tension between enforcing regional security and managing global economic integration. Looking at these events through a planetary lens definitely reveals complexities that a strictly Western perspective often misses.
Absolutely. The source material we've explored today offers incredibly rich detail, and there's certainly much more to uncover regarding how these shifting alliances will define the coming decades.
The global architecture is undoubtedly in a state of rapid evolution. As we close, we are left to consider that opening image of the economic tourniquet, whether it is a necessary life-saving intervention to stabilize a hemorrhaging world order or a fatal miscalculation that will permanently sever the very global arteries it sought to protect. Well, that is a diagnosis history has yet to finalize.
That's it for today's Artificially Informed.
Nope. Thanks for spending your time with us.
Yeah.
Stay sharp, stay curious. See you next time.